I'm here in Philadelphia, home of the Phillies. And as I'm standing here on the steps where Rocky once jumped up and down, I'm thinking about the concept of nostalgia and how we have to be careful. Every generation thinks they have the best nostalgia. Every generation thinks that their era of sports watching was the best. And you could fall into the trap of telling new generations that what they have isn't that great, when actually it could be incredible. This is Locked On MLB.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. On today's episode, I am doing one on location. As you can probably tell from the background, I'm not in California. I'm in Philadelphia. I'm right outside Citizens Bank Ballpark, the home of the Philadelphia Phillies. I'm a television producer and writer and a performer and teacher and been a baseball podcaster for the last decade, and I know a thing or two about the game. Follow us at Locked On MLB pods on both Instagram and Twitter. Easy for you to say. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Yeah, I'm here in Philadelphia. I'm seeing a game here. The Phillies are going to be playing the minor league team that's called the Washington Nationals. The game. But you know what? As I alluded to in the preamble, I want to talk a little bit about nostalgia and why the Philadelphia Phillies, who are one of the oldest teams in baseball, really should give us a fresh look at what nostalgia really means. Looking back at the glorious past and something that baseball, I don't know, for whatever reason, thinks exists only in the post-war years. Now, the Philadelphia Phillies have played in one form or another, in one name or another, since the creation of the National League. They played in the Baker Bowl in downtown, northern Philadelphia, in the 1880s. That's right, the 1880s is when they played there. And they have played there, they played at Shibe Park, and they had a history of being, what's the word I'm looking for? Awful. Absolutely dreadful. If you were talking about nostalgia of the good old days and everything of Philadelphia baseball, you're probably going to be talking about the A's and Connie Mack's A's. And the fact of the matter is that the A's wound up going to the World Series in the 1900s, the 1910s, the 1920s, and the 1930s. From the first World Series that was played in 1903 until through the year 1979, the Philadelphia Phillies won one World Series game. Not one World Series, one game. In 1915, they won one game. They won a grand total of 2 pennants, and along the way lost more games than any team in Major League history. They had one of the most notorious disasters at the end of the 1964 season that took place at Connie Mack Stadium, where they blew an unlosable pennant to a Cardinal team that went on to win the World Series. If you're talking about looking back at the glorious past in Philadelphia, it isn't in a post-war glorious haze. It isn't at an old-timey ballpark. It isn't looking at, remember when we were listening to Rock Around the Clock and all that stuff. No. As I alluded to in the opening tease, nostalgia for the Phillies, albeit a franchise that had existed for a long, long time, is really a product of the 1970s. Now think about this for a second. I'm going to show you something. Right behind me is a parking lot. It's the parking lot that's right outside of Citizens Bank Ballpark. Now, Citizens Bank Ballpark is in a complex called the Wells Fargo Complex, which I think is interesting that the Citizens Bank Ballpark is in a complex named after a different bank, but I digress. Lincoln Financial Stadium is there. Wait, where is it? That's the football stadium? No, that's the Philly Stadium. Wait, where is it? Somewhere there. You got the football stadium, you got the basketball arena. Just trust me, it's all there. In this giant complex of sport arenas. Now, that's nothing new in Philadelphia. This is more or less the same spot where the Spectrum existed, and Kennedy Stadium, where Live Aid was played, and the Veterans Stadium. This parking lot right here is where Veterans Stadium existed. This was the Vet. And the Vet was one of those cold, maligned cookie-cutter parks, a multi-purpose park that could be mistaken for the park in St. Louis, mistaken for the park in Atlanta, mistaken for the park in Pittsburgh, mistaken for the park in Cincinnati. They all look the same, ergo the cookie-cutter park handle. But I'm going to give the Vet some love and respect, because when the Phillies played in beautiful parks that harken back to the old days and everything, they stunk. There was nothing to cheer for. They were awful. When they moved to the Vet, things changed. Was the Vet pretty? No. But a lot of times Philadelphia isn't pretty. That's not a knock on you, Philadelphia. I happen to love this city. But in its coldness and its toughness rose its greatest year, the greatest moments in Philadelphia baseball history, at least since the A's left. With it was the rise of Steve Carlton and Mike Schmidt and Greg Luzinski and Tug McGraw and the acquisition of Pete Rose. They never won the World Series until they started playing here. They were the definition of an irrelevant team, going decades between pennants. And I could barely use plural because they won a pennant in 1915, a pennant in 1950, and that was it. And then suddenly, with the bicentennial in 1976, they made the playoffs. They made the playoffs again in 77, 78, 81. They won the World Series in 1980, their first ever championship, and won another pennant in 1983 for good measure. If you're talking about Philadelphia nostalgia for the Phillies, you're talking about the glories, you're talking about the times that are happy, they took place in what is now this parking lot. And you know what? The Vet got a lot of grief for being cold, for being ugly, for booing Santa Claus, for fights, for there being a prison and or a jail and a night court in there. It got a lot of grief for looking no different than Cincinnati or Pittsburgh. But do you know what they also did? They won. They had some of their greatest moments there. They had their best championships there. They had their best years there. And so, if you're a Philadelphia fan, what are you nostalgic for? Are you nostalgic for the 50s and you're nostalgic for that looking ballpark? Or are you nostalgic for AstroTurf, for polyester uniforms, for Cookie Cutter Park that was used as a multi-purpose stadium? By the way, when you arrive here, you can see why a multi-purpose stadium might be the way to go. Because you have a baseball stadium right next to a football stadium. The football stadium is empty, but the baseball stadium is being used. So logically, you think, well, why don't we just have one stadium where they both could play in? That made sense. And you know what happened in a lot of these cookie-cutter parks? Not just in Philadelphia. The best years for the Pirates took place there. The best years for the Reds. If you're talking about the greatest Reds teams, you're talking about the Big Red Machine. Some of the greatest moments in Atlanta Braves history took place in their cookie-cutter park. Whether it's Henry Aaron's home run, Francisco Cabrera's single, or the 95 World Series championship. So maybe we should give cookie-cutter parks a little bit of a break. Maybe we should understand that nostalgia does not belong to one generation. I got news for you. I grew up watching games of the cookie-cutter parks. That was what I grew up in. And so I am nostalgic for that. And if you're a Philadelphia fan, these are the glory years right here. This is what you yearn for. So let's give the Vet some respect. You know, I always thought when they started tearing down the cookie-cutter parks in Pittsburgh and Cincinnati and Atlanta and the vet here in St. Louis. I always felt they should have left one. They should have left one. Because first of all, if all but one were destroyed, then that one that was left would be, by definition, unique, right? And not only that, it would be instantly recognizable, but it would respect the nostalgia for people like me for the 70s and 80s. It would respect the fact that for some people, they didn't grow up watching the Polo Grounds in Ebbets Field. They watched games and fell in love with baseball in the circular parks. I felt that they should have kept the vet. Actually, I also felt that maybe they should have kept the one in St. Louis, because that does have a little more character with the arch and everything like that. But for years and years and years, I thought they made a terrible mistake tearing down the vet, because it was disrespectful for what the vet meant and what it meant to the Philadelphia history. And then they made Citizens Bank Ballpark. But guess what? They proved me wrong.
Let's take a quick moment to talk about Blue Nile. Whether you're ready to pop the question or you're celebrating a milestone event, find jewelry as unique as the woman you love with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. Blue Nile has simple online tools that let you choose the diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft their perfect engagement ring, and each ring is one of a kind. Make your moments sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And going on now is the Blue Nile Anniversary Sale. Save up to 40% on classic fine jewelry pieces and 25% on engagement ring settings. Plus, every order is insured, ships for free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today. Hey, did you know the key to sustainable weight loss is through your liver? The liver is the body's metabolic furnace, and it's responsible for flushing out harmful toxins and igniting your fat-burning metabolism. Thanks to modern diets rich in unhealthy and processed foods and constant exposure to thousands of man-made environmental toxins, most of us have overworked livers. But now it's easy to rejuvenate your liver health and reignite your metabolism thanks to Liver Health Formula by Pure Health Research. Liver Health Formula contains 8 liver-boosting super nutrients like turmeric, beet, and artichoke extract, all of which work together to wake up a sluggish liver and turn into a toxin-flushing, fat-burning machine. No more bloated belly, no more uncomfortable digestion, and no more feeling tired and low energy all the time. And best of all, Liver Health Formula makes it easier to maintain a healthy body weight long term. As a listener of our show, you can try Liver Health Body Formula risk-free and get a free bottle of Curb Fit with your order. Curb Fit is a safe and all-natural appetite suppressant, making it easy to say no to naughty foods. This makes a perfect complement to Liver Health Formula. Go to getliverhelp.com/MLB to learn more. Again, that's getliverhelp.com/MLB to try Liver Health Formula completely risk-free and claim your free bottle of Curb Fit with your order.
The vet also symbolized another part of Philadelphia sports greatness. The greatest era of Philadelphia sports basically started around the bicentennial, right around the time Rocky was jumping up and down right there. That was a period of time where the Phillies went from totally irrelevant to being a perennial contender and in the postseason. You also had the Broad Street Bullies with the Flyers. You had Dr. J and Moses Malone with the 76ers. This Philadelphia greatness basically went from the mid-70s right through the 80s. The Phillies won the World Series. The Eagles went to the Super Bowl. Even Villanova pulled off one of the great upsets in the history of basketball. And so with that in mind, someone around my age, keep in mind I was between 5 or 6 and 12 or 13 when that was happening, my formative years of watching sports, that made Philadelphia one of the great meccas of championship caliber sports. You know what? Even Balboa beat Clubber Lang. And the Russian dude for that matter. And so there was a sense that Philadelphia sport could not possibly be better, which is why I wanted Veterans Stadium to exist as almost a monument to that. But remember, for kids who are growing up now, the glory days of the 70s and of the 80s would be the equivalent of when I was growing up to talk about the 1910s or 1920s or 1930s. It was a different time. They don't want to just hear about those old great memories of people yapping about that. They're bored of hearing about that. They want their own stories. They want their own nostalgia to build up and their own greatness. And you know what? They have it. They have it at Citizens Bank Ballpark with one of the great Philly runs of all time, 5 straight trips to the postseason, back-to-back pennants. No Philly team had ever won back-to-back pennants. You have to go back to the Philadelphia A's of the 1930s to find back-to-back trips to the World Series. Not even Mike Schmidt's Phillies could pull that off. And with the likes of Ryan Howard and the likes of Cole Hamels and all of them, this is the nostalgia for current Philly fans. And you know what? I was too blind to see it. And Citizens Bank Ballpark is a monument to that, a monument to the new greatness. And you know what? I was wrong for wanting them to go back to the old hats and the old uniforms. That was me clinging and being too precious. When you see that old classic logo with the Mike Schmidt era, that harkens back to one era of championship. When you see the other, you start to think of Hamels and Roy Halladay and Cliff Lee and all those great moments with those Phillies teams. I became a little too precious with my nostalgia. And you know what? Sometimes you have to let go of it a little bit. You know, if the past, present, and future have to exist and create a sense of timelessness in baseball, then you have to let it exist. I was hearkening back to the Veterans Stadium and pining poetically about a notoriously ugly, cold stadium that had a court inside of it, and resisting a beautiful new state-of-the-art ballpark. Look at this place. Look at the food. Look at the sight lines. I wanted this instead of I wanted a concrete donut instead of this. That's just bananas. And do you know what? I fell into that trap. See if you can avoid it. You know, there are going to be kids of a certain age who don't care about Mike Schmidt, who don't care about Steve Carlton, who don't care about Greg Luzinski, but they're going to care about Jimmy Rollins and Cole Hamels and Roy Halladay and Ryan Howard and Shane Victorino and all them. That's their nostalgia, and you know, how dare I get in the way of that? And you know what? There are all new fans who are going to be looking at the Bryce Harpers and the JT Realmutos and saying, this is our group. You know, nostalgia needs to be malleable. It can't just be one section of memory is better than the other. It has to be an element of all of our memories have value. Just because I didn't get to see Ted Williams, I did get to see Carl Yastrzemski and Jim Rice, and other people got to see David Ortiz. These fans who didn't get to see Dick Allen or Mike Schmidt got to see Ryan Howard, and the ones who didn't get to see Bryce Harper. Nostalgia isn't frozen in time. Every generation has their own version. There's so much character in this ballpark. There's so much of a sense of Philly's history in this ballpark that they just did it right. So look it. The Phillies just won the game, by the way. It was a pretty good game between them and Washington. But what I'm begging you to do is don't make the same mistake the previous generation did and your pal Sully did, which is be too guarded about nostalgia. Sure, I thought the era between the bicentennial and the 1983 World Series was the greatest era for Philadelphia sports fans. Between the Flyers, 76ers, Eagles, Villanova, and the Phillies. But you know what? For some young fan who's experiencing this and experiencing the Eagles and everything else, it's something special for them too. And in a bunch of years, they'll be saying it was never better than then. So So go to LockedOnMLB.com. You can follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and on Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter. Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Trying to shout above the loudspeakers here at Citizens Bank Park in Philadelphia. A great place to build new nostalgia for Philadelphia fans. This has been Locked On MLB. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.